Let's get to Canberra now. First question time of the year. Sky's political chief, Andrew Clennell, joins us. Well, Andrew, the Greens' Lidia Thorpe decision, in a sense it was a shock, but in another sense, she couldn't have really stayed in that role prosecuting the Greens case on Indigenous affairs with the views she had, could she?
Well, such is the nature of the Greens. Adam Bandt has said today that the leader has said that he tried to get her to stay. He said it was okay to stay in that job, but when it came to the Voice, he would be talking about it and she would just deal with the rest of Indigenous affairs. How ridiculous. But I guess once he put that to her, she decided to jump. And I think she had some warning. They had a party room, 2-day party room, a fortnight ago in Victoria, where I think it was made clear to her that the rest of the Greens MPs were going to support a Voice. She was not. She didn't think it went far enough. She thinks you need a treaty. And so she's gone. And she told Adam Bandt today.
Surprising. Were you surprised she took no questions? Here's a little bit of what she said to the media gathered outside Parliament House earlier.
I want to represent that movement fully in this Parliament. It has become clear to me that I can't do that from within the Greens. I will continue to vote with the Greens on climate. My focus now is to grow and amplify the black sovereign movement in this country, something we've never had since this place was established.
Pretty ordinary, Andrew, that she wouldn't even take a question from anybody.
Well, unusual too, because normally when people quit political movements or parties or whatever, they'll sit there and take 30 questions. They're loving the attention, aren't they? So, yeah, I was surprised by that. Certainly here we had a view that she was going to be on air for some minutes, and before you knew it, she'd taken off.
It does set off a debate, doesn't it? And I heard you talking to Kieran about this earlier, but if you get elected to the Senate on a party ticket, as Lidia Thorpe was in Victoria, that you should stick out your term with that party, shouldn't you? Or if you can't, because you don't agree with the way they're prosecuting an argument, then perhaps you should give up your Senate seat and move on. She's only there, is she not, because she was elected as a Green, Andrew?
No doubt about it from my point of view, Steve. It's an interesting one, yet you haven't even got Adam Bandt calling on her to quit the Senate. I think Adam Bandt saw a problem criticising an Aboriginal woman in the context of the Voice. I think he knew that with his constituency, he couldn't be seen to do that, and he might have indeed split the party. So it's probably filthy she quit, and probably filthy at some of her antics, frankly, but he's never going to say so. And I think that is a decent point. I think it's a bit different downstairs in the House of Reps. By-elections are very expensive, and we don't like to see them. And also people vote for a good local member because they can get things moving in terms of local projects. So there's more of the local member invested in a vote of an electorate. But when it comes to the Senate, no, they're typically voting for the party on the ticket. And so I think it's a bit ordinary when senators do stay on when they can create a casual vacancy and there's no need for a by-election. They can simply be replaced. And what an ironic turn of events. It was 3 years ago, almost to the day, first day of Parliament 2020, I remember it well. Richard Di Natale walked in and said, I'm quitting. It was his vacancy that Lidia Thorpe took up eventually, and Adam Bandt, all three of them are Victorian. Adam Bandt actually grew up in WA at the same time as I did, actually, but he's lived in Victoria for some time. He hails from Victoria in terms of the Senate. He became leader. If only he'd known then that this Lidia Thorpe would cause him so much trouble 3 years down the track by taking Di Natale's vacancy. I think a lot of Greens members would be out there tonight saying, if only we hadn't pre-selected her.
I think you're probably right. I saw you talking earlier about cost of living, and you made the very valid point, I think, to Kieran, that that's going to be the big issue during this term of Parliament. We saw Ross Greenwood there talking about what will potentially be a 0.25% interest rate hike tomorrow. Question Time opened up with a bit of that today. Angus Taylor tried to nail the Prime Minister on just how many Australians might have those fixed rate mortgages, Andrew, that, you know, they may have to be flicked over to a floating rate, you know, sometime in the next couple of months. The PM didn't seem to have a direct answer on how many, but let's have a listen to that exchange between those two.
How many Australian households are set to face higher mortgages this year when they move from fixed rate loans to variable rate loans?
We know that this is an issue, and that is why we are doing all that we can, just as we did last October, to produce a responsible budget.
Mr. Speaker, if this was a priority for the Prime Minister, he'd know the answer to the question.
Resume your seat.
There will be an increased pressure on around about 800,000 Australians.
You've got to imagine, Andrew, that the government is going to be pressured on this every Question Time between now and whenever the next election is. But we saw a news poll today, Albo's fall in 3 points to 56%. You know, interest rate rises and pressure on people for mortgage repayments, that's a massive, massive issue for Australians. Financial stress and pressure must be just about the worst kind of stress and pressure you can get. How much is this going to impact on the government's popularity and their programs, do you reckon?
Well, it hasn't so far. Well, it has in the smallest amount so far. So I think it's an interesting one because there seems to be a bit of a leave pass for this government in terms of the global situation. People know that it's the same it's worse in the US and UK, in fact, when it comes to inflation. But we know as time goes on, as people's personal situations get worse, then we will see perhaps a turn in the political fortunes. That's certainly the opposition's view. That's their strategy. And, you know, it's the one I'd have as well in their position. And, of course, the R word's what looms large. That's the possibility of a recession. If the Reserve Bank keeps hiking rates, which they're going to do again tomorrow, and people go under. And that was interesting. That question was about trying to catch Anthony Albanese on the detail again. But in Question Time, you've got notes to refer to, and he got there eventually. But, gee whiz, that's a lot of people, 800,000, who are basically on a 1 to 2% interest rate, about to leap straight up to 5%. And that's a lot of votes too, potentially, Steve. So we'll see. But, I mean, the other thing that people in government have always said to me was that they were quite fortunate, Steve, that the inflation started moving prior to them being elected. Imagine if they had been elected and only then inflation started moving. So then it looks more like a symptom of an economy as opposed to caused by government, particularly when it's happening in New Zealand and the UK and the US. They've been a bit lucky with that, but they're going to have to stay on top of this, and it's not easy. The fact they addressed power bills was important, but they're going to have to do a lot more without driving up inflation. They're going to have to be careful.
Great to have Andrew Clennell with us. I just wanted to ask you a quick one about New South Wales and pokies. I mean, you tried to get an answer out of Dominic Perrottet last week about buybacks, which would seem to me to be one way to limit what is the world record number of poker machines in any given jurisdiction other than Vegas. But it appears from what's announced today, there's only going to be 2,000 machines bought back out of 86,000. That's not much of a buyback.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting bit of detail there, Steve, and I'm with you on that. You know, the Sydney Morning Herald's been running this day after day, and Dominic Perrottet's teamed up with them on the cashless gaming, and that's fair enough. People should set limits on their gambling. I mean, you can do it on your smartphone if you're betting on one of those betting websites, so why shouldn't it happen in relation to pokies? But as you say, if Dominic Perrottet wants to go out there every day and say, we've got, you know, as many gaming machines as Nevada, only us and Nevada are up there, and Bob Carr stuffed this up by allowing so many, why doesn't he wind them back? You know, if he's the man of political courage that he says he is, and bear in mind they've been in government for 12 years, and the Minister, Victor Dominello, was talking about a cashless card 3 years ago. So what they're saying is they could have legislated for this last year, frankly. He's been Premier for a year. So he's saying, if you elect me, I'll do this. But it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors when he doesn't act to reduce the poker machines. If he's serious, He should be compensating clubs and pubs and reducing them by at least 10,000 in my book, Steve.
Yeah, well said. And look, I think his backbench are terrified by this. I think they see it as, Andrew, and I don't need to remind you, this is the modern greyhounds and koalas issue for the coalition government, because I was in southern New South Wales last week at a very large pokies venue, and they're terrified about what's going to happen to their revenue if these cashless cards come in.
People don't like being told what to do. And they put up with it for a little while during COVID because they were trying to save lives. But at the end of that, they had the view, we are definitely sick now of governments telling us what to do. And that's the danger for Dominic Perrottet. Taking away machine licences, I think, would be easier in some respects, even though some clubs and pubs would blow up, than saying to someone, you have to have this cashless card. That's a difficult pill for a lot of people to swallow. They say, why shouldn't I be able to go down my local club and pub and have a punt without you looking at it?
Yeah, good stuff, Andrew. You've done some great work on that. Thank you very much, my friend. That's Andrew Clennell in Canberra for the start of the new parliamentary year.